Taiwan News, 23rd of November 2023, How the world's most prominent debt collector, Hegemonic China, came to be. President Xi Jinping's foreign policy mostly centers around China's massive Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, which supports and frequently builds 21,000 infrastructure projects worldwide. Frequently likened to the United States Marshall Plan for Europe following World War II, Beijing has extended around $1.3 trillion, €1.2 trillion, in loans during the last 10 years or so to finance the building of bridges, ports, and highways in low and middle-income nations, per a recent analysis. The new Silk Road moniker comes from BRI restoring historic trade routes connecting China and the rest of the globe. Furthermore, to Washington and Brussels' dismay, Beijing's influence on the world stage has increased. Critics claim that the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, has left poor countries with excessive debt and a significant carbon impact at a time when environmental preservation ought to come first. The Philippines is among the nations that have abandoned initiatives. Others have cited China's practice of awarding contracts for infrastructure projects to its state-run companies, frequently resulting in opaque construction costs that nations subsequently find challenging to renegotiate. The time for reckoning has come, even though China has promised to keep pouring billions of dollars into new initiatives. For several of those loans, the past due amount has now arrived. What number of BRI loans have defaulted? According to a report released by Aid Data last week, China lends to developing nations experiencing financial difficulties for 80% of the total amount. According to the US-based research firm, at least $1.1 trillion in total outstanding debt does not include interest. The report notes that past due repayments are rising, but it does not estimate the number of loans that have gone bad. The paper's authors also mentioned that 94 BRI projects had been cancelled or suspended, putting 1,693 projects in danger. More than half of the BRI loans have now reached their principal payback phase, according to Aid Data's calculation. This is happening at a time when global base interest rates have substantially increased, adding to the debtor nation's repayment burden. The paper's authors discovered that China has increased the interest rate as a late payment penalty from 3% to 8.7% in some instances, more than doubling the penalty. Less than 5% of projects were collateralized when China first began lending to developing nations at the beginning of the century, compared to over two-thirds today. According to a World Bank report earlier this year, Beijing has already had to provide the BRI countries with billions of dollars in bailout loans. Aid Data discovered that China is currently implementing a new plan to reduce its exposure to a wave of troubled loans, including rescue loans that support the finances of the governments to which it has lent money and frequently their central banks. How are Europe and the United States competing with China? According to Aid Data, the US is lagging behind China in loans to low and middle-income nations, with the former investing over $80 billion annually. Washington invests over $60 billion in development finance annually because the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, DFC, funds private sector initiatives. One example of U.S. financing is the $500 million project announced earlier this month to build a deep-water shipping container terminal in Sri Lanka's Port of Colombo. The island nation in the Indian Ocean is having difficulty recovering from a severe financial and economic catastrophe, and its current loan obligations to China's Belt and Road Initiative have made things more difficult. Beijing provided financial assistance for constructing Hambantota Port, an airport, and a city on reclaimed territory located on Sri Lanka's southeast coast. The initiatives aren't profitable enough to pay back the loans, though. The Build Back Better World (BEW) program was introduced by the G7 2 years ago, marking yet another attempt by the US and its partners to offset the Belt and Road Program, BRI. Furthermore, last month, the European Union convened its inaugural summit for the Global Gateway Initiative. This program is viewed as a substitute for the Belt and Road Initiative and is anticipated to contribute to the preservation of Europe's sway, especially in the Global South. Agreements with governments in Europe, Asia, and Africa totaling about €70 billion, $76 billion, were signed during the negotiations. The support from the EU, which could total up to €300 billion, will go toward projects involving transport corridors, renewable energy, and essential raw minerals. Ursula von der Leyen, the chief of the European Commission, predicted that the Global Gateway would provide poor nations with a better choice when it came to funding infrastructure projects. Although she did not specifically criticize China's Belt and Road Initiative, She did point out that other financing choices frequently had a high price. According to aid data, the G7 outspent China in 2021 by $84 billion, even if the US and its allies cannot consistently equal Beijing dollar for dollar, partly because they have made too many promises and cannot fulfill them. Aid data also advised the US and its allies not to compete with China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, as Beijing transitions from massive construction projects to debt collection in its study. The failure of many BRI initiatives, according to the report's authors, does present a chance to entice impacted nations, like Sri Lanka, back into the Western world.